let's talk about it.
Hello and welcome back to Thicc Radio, the podcast where we talk about gaming, feedism, and everything in their orbit. I'm James.
And I'm Tim, so let's get into it. Today we're welcoming to the show, we've got a good friend of ours, Kurt.
Hello, everyone. Nice to see you guys. And
Good.
hello to everyone out there.
Good to see you too. How are you today?
I'm good. I feel fat and sexy all the time, so I'm very excited to be here.
Well, I think that is the perfect frame of mind to be in for a day, especially a day like today, because once again, we are celebrating the anniversary of yet another iconic Gainer film, and I feel like this one's been coming for a while. I mean, that's how time works, obviously, but we've had the chance to look at Beauty and the Beast for the Muscle Gainers and a couple of other different ones, which is all fun. But today we're talking about the Santa Claus. And I feel like when I think of iconic Gainer cinema, the Santa Claus is immediately top three. Like, not even a debate, right? Like, it's just the amount of people in our community who think about that film, think about that one scene in particular, and all I have to do is say that one scene in particular, and we're all thinking of the exact same scene on a treadmill. Just proves how iconic this is. So listen, Kurt, you ready to get stuck into this today?
I do want to preface, I think it might be iconic for millennials because I know that Gen Z doesn't necessarily know the scene. And also, I don't know about Gen X, but possibly them too.
Well, this is why we want to talk about these films, right? Because it's interesting to look at these moments that capture the imagination of a generation when it happens. Like, I feel like for Gen X, it must have been Willy Wonka, right?
I suppose so.
So for us, it's that. And then, we've already talked about The Incredibles and Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, which I think probably more impacted Gen Z. And of course, if we haven't done a review of a Gainer iconic movie yet, and you want us to cover it when the anniversary rolls around, reach out to us at thiccradio@gmail.com. We'll add it to the list and we'll celebrate it when the time is right. But today, talking about the Santa Claus. So you mentioned, obviously, some Gen Z kids probably don't know this movie as a reference point. It did come out in 1994. What is the film about, Kurt?
It's about a Santa Claus. I mean, basically in the movie, the Santa Claus falls off the roof and then he puts on the suit. Now he's the Santa Claus, as in Tim Allen is the Santa Claus. So he's the chosen one. It's not necessarily about getting fat, but that's definitely a big theme in the movie.
Oh, definitely. And it is interesting. And we'll talk a little bit more about, like, kind of what other Santa films have been doing in that time, right? Talking about how tropes change. But, it is interesting that every Christmas film takes place at Christmas. That's what makes it a Christmas film. The argument about Die Hard will never fucking stop. But what is different about this one is that it actually takes place over a calendar year. Like, it both starts and finishes at Christmas, but the bulk of the film happens in between. And that's the thing I think that's really interesting about it. You're kind of introduced to the notion of it's Christmas time, we have expectations, it's lights and it's cheery and it's smiley. And this thing happens and he kind of just has to accept it and go like, okay, I guess, and then tries to live his life. And then you do see this reflection of the year that is, where everyone's at work or everyone's going through things. He's going through a divorce and all this other kind of stuff, and that's not cheery, that's not Christmas. And so there's this man who in a calendar year has to kind of rediscover this joy of childhood, of life, and all this kind of stuff. So I do think it does stand out, for aside from the obvious fat reasons, it does stand out as a narrative versus other Christmas films. I mean, Tim, you were around when Santa first walked the earth. What do you think about Christmas films like this?
What do I think of Christmas films like this?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not really a fan of Christmas films in general. Like my favorite Christmas movie is Gremlins, but I was in junior high, I think, when this came out, or I was just about to enter junior high or something like that. I didn't really pay much attention to it until the scene that we all know by heart. But overall, this is not a movie that has a significant emotional connection to me. My sisters love it because they were younger than me. They were, they would watch it every Christmas. Um, but yeah, I mean, I would say that the film is basically one father's journey to reconnect with his son because their relationship is extremely fractured in the beginning of the film, and then by the end of it, they've repaired it, and Charlie, the name of the name of his son, is completely enamored with his father at that point, and even wants to follow in his footsteps when he grows up. So I would say it's sort of one of those coming of age films.
I agree with you because I I definitely saw the sort of I went my parents are also divorced, and I see when I watched that movie, I saw how Charlie didn't want to leave his mom to go be with his dad. And my parents divorced when I was 10, so a little bit older than Charlie, but yeah, I definitely see how the struggle, be going with one parent or the other, and always kind of, being a boy, you always want to be with your mom, so your dad. So I definitely saw connected with him that way. And, I always kind of wanted my dad to, he's really trying to be with his son, but, and I mean, I'm sure my dad did too, but I don't think he could express it the way that they did in that movie.
Hmm. I mean, similarly, my parents divorced, and it is interesting when you think about, again, these narratives of the film. He goes from being this person who is very career driven, very, not to say curmudgeonly, because I don't think he was so much of that. I think he was more like this stoic realist who couldn't be bothered and rolled his eyes at everything. Tim, don't be triggered. Uh,
No, I'm laughing because Tim Allen, that's kind of what he's known for. Like every character he plays is an asshole.
yeah.
And like Scott Calvin is no exception. Scott Calvin is also an asshole. But like throughout the course of the film, he realizes like I can't be an asshole all the time. Like I have to care about some things.
It is interesting, right? Like, and in later movies, they call it the sanctification process. And I know that there's like role plays and fantasies around all this, but it is interesting that, that sort of obligatory process of the becoming Santa means that he has to change, right? Physically. And yes, we're going to talk about that a lot, but also emotionally. You see that in one of the scenes where he first starts to put on weight. He's going into that typical corporate office, and, he goes from being this what's the bottom dollar? What's the capitalist approach to this? And becomes the guy who's like, no, 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 let's talk about the fun and the joy and everything else. And there are moments throughout the film where I think he has to come to reckon with that, where he's still trying to connect with his son, where he's trying to navigate relations, with his ex-wife and her new partner and trying to figure things out. And I do think he does begin to realize that the spirit of Christmas isn't just about, oh, you are becoming Santa, you're going to be Santa, ho, 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 jolly fat man. The spirit of Christmas in his life becomes, you are a man who is so in this world which is not built for Christmas, or at least the spirit of it is built in this complete opposite direction. And you have to learn to kind of come back to this childlike fun and joy in order to really get something out of life, which is ultimately what leads to him taking on the mantle with joy, what leads to him becoming such a true representation of the fat, jolly Santa. So there is elements beyond the fatness, although that is, of course, a fantastic motif that we're going to dig into. I mean, Kurt, you were saying that you really related to Charlie when you first saw the film. In terms of the gaining aspect, shall we say, as we begin to dip our toes into, of course, such this infamous direction, what were your thoughts on the film? Did it inspire anything in you at the time?
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't think I was in puberty, of course, so I didn't know what those feelings were, but I knew I wanted to be fat. I knew it. I really liked it. So the sort of instant gaining, I guess you could say, because I mean, he doesn't really instant gain, but he gains quickly. Even when he steps on the scale for the first time and he sees his weight, I think it was only one like 92 or something, but it was going up incrementally, like really quickly, as he's sitting on the scale.
If only it worked that way in real life, right? Like I'm sure every gainer has hoped that one day we're gonna wake up and stand on the scale and it's just slowly creeping. Like
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, I really liked. the getting bigger part. I didn't necessarily love the sanification, as in like the beard, the white hair, that sort of thing. I just wanted to get really fat.
I think as well it's interesting, as a brief tete-a-tete on the use of AI and special effects that people do in films now. Like, everything's computer generated, everything is just images on a screen, which, sure, cool, great. But I don't know, like, I rewatched The Santa Claus recently, obviously, talking about the film today, and I was kind of blown away that I was like, oh, this actually looks like a fat body. This looks like a middle-aged paunch of a fat man who's slowly jogging on a treadmill. I was very impressed with how that really, to this day, still looks like the legitimate thing. And, a lot of these films now where you see fat bodies represented really do kind of caricaturize the notion of fatness. So I wonder if that kind of visual reality was an appeal to young people. I mean, like I say, I come back to it as a point of reference. It's a body that I think I'm already at that size, which is quite incredible. Young James could have never envisioned ever have being so insanely fat, and now I'm sat here like this is just the beginning.
I mean, he does start out, as him getting fat, as what most regular people look like today. So, I mean, he shows up at work and people are like horrified, and he's like like I said, probably like around like 200 pounds.
Well, it's interesting because we talked about this, I think, on a previous episode, Tim. We joked about king size Homer, and it's like this was again an iconic episode of Gainer TV, but the scale's only read 315 pounds. And it's like they made out that he was like struggling to breathe, he was wearing moo-moos, he was, basically needing a scooter to get about, and we're sat here like, baby, 500 pounds is barely cutting mustard. And that's, if that's what you're really after. So it is interesting that just 20 years ago, the visual expectations of what fatness looks like and what the effects of fatness is probably really skewed.
I mean, my God, in that episode, that he couldn't even dial 911 because, like, we're sorry, the fingers you have used to dial are too fat.
If you would like a dialing wand, please mash the phone pad now.
But I think it's interesting in the Santa Claus how they want him to be fat. In the doctor's office, they said he's super healthy, and he does run around a lot. As he's not like lumbering and slow and out of breath or anything in the whole movie. So he's fat, but he's healthy fat.
And again, it's interesting how, I guess, the idea of this Santification, right? They're obviously depicting a man who's becoming fatter, becoming jolly, becoming Santa, and yet, while there are these moments of maybe moving his body differently, it doesn't imply his health. It doesn't imply incapability, because the magic of Santa still allows him to do the thing. And in many ways, weirdly becomes one of the most, like, fat positive representations of larger bodies, because we're just out here doing normal fucking things, because literally that's what we do every day anyways. I do want to ask really quickly, do you identify as a Santa sexual?
I would not say that I am, like I said, because of the white hair sort of thing. I'm not really a daddy type or into daddies, but that doesn't mean that I won't be in the future. I just don't think that I'm at that I mean, as I get older, I get more comfortable with different things about gaining, and I just don't think I'm in that sort of daddy sexual stage yet.
I mean, let's focus there for a second, right? Because again, talking about his journey, he does go through that transformation, and obviously his aesthetic ages because he does have the full white beard and the white hair. There is an element of, like, I guess, sexualized aging, which is a thing that does happen in certain spaces. I mean, there are a number of gamers in the community who are very well known for the fact that they deliberately dishevel themselves or dye their hair or cut their features in a certain way, wear certain clothing to look more like this out of shape daddy figure or even granddaddy figure, even though they themselves are in their 20s and 30s. Tim, as someone who you get labeled with daddy
is old. Is that what you're gonna do? You're gonna make another age joke?
No, not this. No, of course I was, but well done you.
I thought Tim was old, first of all. I thought he was always very young.
Shut up, Kurt. Be
It's
on,
it's
be
it's
on
these
my side for
it's
this.
the fat face. When you got a fatter face, you don't have to worry about wrinkles as much. Like they're still gonna happen, but not nearly as much as if you're.
Also, I don't really see gray hair on you. I
It's
always thought,
mostly in the goatee.
Yeah.
yeah,
He's got a salt and pepper chin strap. But, but anyways, Tim, as the
Yes.
resident daddy on the pod, I mean, what is your thoughts in terms of that aged approach to sexuality and maybe that kind of journey that Tim Allen goes on in the film?
I mean, much like Kurt, I'm not really a Santa-sexual either. I don't necessarily find the image of Santa Claus erotic, but um, and I've known men in my community that are of a certain age where they've got like snow white hair, there's a snow white beard, but there's one leather daddy that I've known for years. He's got the handlebar mustache and he's got a full beard and it's all white, but he's also got this huge belly. I mean, he is just like, it's big, it's round, it's juicy, it's lovely. So, I look at him and I'm immediately turned on. But I think I'm turned on for a completely different reason, not necessarily because I'm thinking, oh, this guy looks like Santa. It's more like I'm thinking this daddy is extremely hot. And even though I get labeled as a daddy, like I'm into that myself. Like I'm into the daddy aesthetic on other men as well. So yeah, I could see that the whole daddification of Tim Allen like being something that people could be into. He's a handsome man, and so when they put the age makeup on him, he was still handsome.
I mean, I think he's 40 when he does this movie. So he is already, I mean, in the beginning, he's already an older, like a middle-aged guy. So I think that, if he was just fat as the way he looked, without getting like super, like as in like aging to like 70 or more, I think he would look so hot. And that's kind of what I like now, just because I'm 36, I'll be 37 this year, and I like the fat dad look. I don't like the fat grandpa look necessarily. But I'm not saying it goes against what anyone likes or anything. Of course, everyone likes what they like, but the scene where he's at the soccer game and he's sitting on the bench and the girl comes over and she wants to tell him what she wants for Christmas. That scene is also like, I don't want to be a Santa Claus and have people assume that I'm Santa Claus. And then, but I mean, just him being that big is so sexy, but I don't want to get that big and people just assume that I'm Santa.
Well, what I think is really interesting about that, right? Because I think the implication of the film is like by somehow Santa magic, these children just know that he's Santa and they can give them their list or whatever. But what that reflects on in real life is how children don't understand the nuances because they're young. They only know these very basic physical attributes of, okay, he's fat, I see this, that is Santa. That is the only thing that matters, right? And so it's interesting to think that even without having other of those features, like you mentioned, the white hair or maybe a grandparent aesthetic at this stage, you're more after the dad aesthetic, that alone is still probably enough that if random children at Christmas time saw you lumbering about, they'd be like, oh wow, Santa's out doing something. And that's really interesting that in such a film you get to see that reference of such firm linear framework. But that's also kind of what the film is challenging. You see Tim Allen as this mogul dad who happens to work with toys, but originally he's suited and booted. He's doing the thing to look like a modern capitalist man, and then his aesthetic changes. You create a brand new idea of who this person is. I think this is what's really interesting about fatness, is how at our core, we don't change as people. We just add pounds of flesh to what we're doing. And yet, people's interpretation of who we are, what we're like as people, our hygiene, what we do for work, what we do for fun, what we're like as human beings, completely shifts and changes just because you get fat. And if I can ask this question here for you, Kurt, like, have you noticed any of that change? Because you've grown quite substantially. What of those opinions around people have changed for you since you started getting fat?
I definitely feel it's harder to do things as you get fatter, of course. I wouldn't say that I'm totally incapable of doing stuff, but I mean, in the movie, him getting fatter almost represents him turning into a slob, even though he dresses. I mean, he dresses more and more like Santa as the time goes on. But in the first time when he does get fat and he puts on, those sweatpants, that's like seen as like the slob look. And I get it because like when you get bigger, you want to find stuff that's stretchy, and sweatpants, I guess at that time was seen as just like the lazy, sloppy look, or unless you're going to the gym. But nowadays, like, everything has stretch in it. I think in that movie, and from what I see in my life, people are so used to seeing fat as being ugly, and you're going to turn ugly, and people aren't going to be attracted to you because you're this sort of like sloppy fat look. Whereas for me, I don't really have that sloppy, and like I have a round ball belly, and I think people think that when I get fatter, I'm just going to turn into a super sloppy, flabby look, which I love, but I don't think it's going to happen because it's just the way my body is, my composition of my body and how my genetics are. And also being super confident, because Tim Allen still is super confident in becoming Santa. And I think it's also like he's injected with this sort of Santa magic that makes him happy and confident.
Yeah, and you do see a lot more of this, I guess, in the second film, because the whole premise is in the second film, for people who haven't seen it, is he needs to find a Mrs. Claus. He's starting to lose his Santa powers, but he still has that gregarious personality to try and find someone. So you do get to see a little bit more of that as that film goes on. And I don't know, I do think in a way that Santa encourages the gainer aesthetic because, we talked about this before. Aside from Santa, Shrek is probably the only true, like, positive fat male role model that exists, because every other male role model has to be comedic. He has to be dumb. He has to be the farting joke. He can't ever just be a normal person. And in a way, these are both fantastical characters. They're not real people in that regard, but yeah, like, he is a positive fat human. I mean, Tim, referencing this period of the early 90s, can you think of other examples where a fat guy was actually just like normal and
No, not really. Not really. Not off the top of my head anyway. I mean, most cartoons, TV shows, movies, pretty much all media of the early 90s was the fat guy was the comic relief, or he was the best friend, the sexually non-threatening best friend, or something along those lines. Certainly never the romantic lead.
I mean, it's probably worth mentioning here as well. Obviously, this is not the only Christmas movie to exist. Obviously, this is not the only movie about Santa Claus or involving Santa Claus. But what's interesting is that after this period and this particular character, you start to see Santa being introduced as a pretty in shape person who wears some kind of, insulated suit because of the cold, or, there's some kind of character line where it's like, I thought you'd be fat. And he's like, no, I've been on that Jenny Craig diet, or, oh, comrades, 10 pounds, that type of thing. What is your take on like a slimmed down Santa?
I don't know if you guys have seen, I think it's called The Christmas Chronicles on Netflix.
Yeah, with Kurt Russell.
Yeah.
Kurt Russell.
Because you notice in that movie, Santa's not really fat. I guess I don't know what he is, because it doesn't like really look like they focused on him being fat. I mean, I do have to say the beard that they use and the Santa suit, I think, are the most beautiful I've ever seen in any Christmas movie.
Very luck. Very, like, Santa got money.
Yeah.
Been footing the bill for Santa to get some new threads.
Yeah, he's been making his elves do it.
Yeah.
Slick flavor.
Even in the Chronicles 2, when they introduced, Goldie Hawn as Mrs. Claus, everything that she put on was just beautiful. But she didn't look old, and it wasn't like that old grandma look that you see in a lot of Christmas looks. So he was just a healthy looking Santa Claus with really nice clothes. But also I think about, the Coca-Cola commercial with, Santa drinking the Coke, and he's really fat in that, but that's an old ad, of course. I mean, we know that Santa probably does like Coke, right?
Well, what I find, and I believe that I mentioned this in the last time that we were talking about Santa as a concept, is that the way that Americans view Santa Claus is really thanks to the Coca-Cola company because they needed a mascot. They needed something that they could use to push their sales during, especially during the holiday season. So they decided to create the sort of modern image of Santa Claus that we all have in our heads, the red suit that's trimmed with the white fur, the black boots, the cap. I don't know what do you call that thing that the hat that he's wearing. This is all manufactured for us by a company that wanted to make money. And the way that I feel about the whole slimming down of Santa, I think it's stupid. And like, I know where it's coming from. The reason they're slimming Santa down is because everyone is so terrified of potentially influencing young children to do something that they don't want them to do, that they have to sanitize everything. And if, if it was just like they were trying to discover some new aesthetic or try something different, like that'd be one thing. But no, they're genuinely trying to like get rid of the image of Fat Santa. And now Coca-Cola barely uses that image at all. Like during the holidays, they use polar bears now rather than using Santa. And there's just something about this whole homogenizing everything just so that, oh God, we can't expose children to something that they may develop a bad habit around. Never mind all of the fetishistic shit that winds up in kids' cartoons. So
It's just fascinating when you think about it. And as I say, Santa and Shrek are probably two of the only positive fat male role models that exist, and they're proactively trying to get rid of one. Yeah, it's just interesting to me. But when I think about the positives of the film, I think about the ways in which his size really is celebrated. There is a joy in his size. I don't know that his size is often played for comedic effect. I mean, the first morning he wakes up, he stands up, farts, great, steps on the scale, and he has his moments where he's like, oh man, I'm getting fat. But like after that, which is I think a logical shock of, oh, I'm putting on weight, it really isn't a moment for him anymore. Like he dresses in the only clothes that'll fit him, which is all these grey sweats, and then he goes into work because that's all that fits. He's like, yeah, I was stung by a bee, a big bee. But he doesn't.
Also, you don't even. I mean, it's almost like he gained that weight, and then oh, he's gonna lose his job. But they never really show him losing his job. They just show him becoming Santa, and that's it. Like, and there's a lot of things about being fat, like being lazy, not being productive at work,
Mm.
eating a lot, like craving those stereotypical things, like when he's ordering lunch and all he orders is like cookies, pies, cakes, and ice cream, while everyone else is ordered, like the woman next to him ordered a salad and a diet coke or iced tea or something.
Mm.
Like that sort of contrast. But yeah, I mean, it never shows him like losing his job, but you have to assume that he did eventually lose his job. But I mean, he has obviously a much better job now.
I do think it interesting, right? And if I can ask you here, Kurt, because you, much like myself, are an office worker. Throughout your gaining journey, have you felt that the way you have been treated in the office setting has shifted because of your weight?
I don't really believe so. And it's something that I always thought, also being gay, openly gay in the office. Like I graduated in 2010, so I would assume that like working in the office, people would say something about me being gay, and then also as I got fatter, say something about that. But it really hasn't happened to me, or at least to my face. And I've never heard anything saying like, "Oh, he's so fat," or "He's so gay," or whatever, something, that sort of thing. I think it's just because I'm really confident in who I am, and that's the difference.
Well, I think that again circles around to what we've kind of been inferring with Santa the whole time. It's like when you have this intrinsic joy and positivity in you, it does make it more difficult for people to have that negative reaction. We talk about this all the time. If someone comes up to you and goes, "Oh, you've put on weight," and then you're on the back foot, you go, "Oh, well, immediately they're going to feel like, "Oh, I've gained ground here because I caught you, and I don't know what I've caught you, but you've gotten fat, and that needs to stop." Whereas if someone tries to be like, "Oh, you've put on weight," and you go, "Yeah, and you just stop it in their track, people will clam up. They will go,
I crave experiences where people will call out my weight or something, and it never happens. People are too nice nowadays. Like probably assume that you're sad or something, but they don't even touch it. Even though being fat isn't a protected class in the workplace, people won't bring it up.
You're right about the narrative that has been built around weight gain is, oh, you must be sad, you must be going through something, you must be extremely stressed out, things must be a mess for you. You know, they've constructed the idea that if you're overweight, there must be some kind of problem going on in your life. So there is a sort of like people who have the social graces to understand that it's probably not a good idea to trigger anyone. That those are the people who are going to avoid the situation. There are occasionally people who will just point it out anyway because they're that type of person. They're like, well, I'm just being honest, you know, that type of person, which is code for I'm being an asshole. But yeah, I've only had it pointed out like maybe 1 or 2 times since I started gaining by someone that I didn't know and by someone who was very clearly trying to like make a statement at me, not to me, but at me.
Yeah, I always wonder, like, if I were to go interview somewhere, would someone not hire me because I'm fat?
Well, it's interesting because, like, the statistics do show that people of size are less likely to be hired. They are less likely to get raises or promotions internally when you look at the stats about the people who apply for those positions versus the people who get them. So there is something there. And I think people rely on the kind of environmental factors to justify it. You know, like when it comes to hiring for a job, I don't need to say I didn't hire you because you're fat. I can say any number of reasons. You know, your CV just wasn't as strong as maybe some of the other people who applied. If it's a promotion, it's a case of, well, actually, so-and-so maybe put a little bit more effort in on this personal project. And of course, you don't get to see those results for yourself. But the reality is, biases do exist against fat people, even if it's not happening, you know, in a certain industry as much or to certain people for whatever reason. It does happen. Though what I find really fascinating coming back to the Santa Claus film is that what we ultimately end up looking at is the narrative of a man who becomes fat, is happy, and is shown to have great success. Like you say, we don't see him being fired from his other job. And even though there are these negative interactions with his ex-wife, divorce, and I'm sure shared custody is a very stressful situation. But we ultimately see a person becoming fat and stepping into a sense of positivity and joy and that greatness that comes with it. He just so happens to
Also,
be Santa.
also, his ex-wife never brings up the fact that he's getting fat. She just looks at him and she sees him basically putting on a costume as opposed to gaining weight and being unhealthy. I was looking for her to say something, even when she's like in doing the custody hearing, and she's saying, "Am I doing the right thing?" Neil, her boyfriend, is like, "He's delusional," but they never bring up the fact that he's getting so fat and he's not a good example to Charlie.
No, and it's very interesting because I did wonder this watching it. Like, he's a psychologist. That's such an interesting because we talk about this anytime we review film. It's like, well, why did they make that decision? Why did they film that shot? And it's like somebody spent tens of thousands of dollars to operate a camera, pay someone to shoot the scene, to say the lines, to have the lighting, to have the color, to have the images right there. So every decision made in a film is intentional. Why is Neil made a psychologist? And I find it very, very fascinating that as a character, he doesn't try to psychoanalyze Scott and go, well, he's fat because he's got depression. But they do talk about, like, maybe he's going through something. Maybe he's not processing this divorce very well. Maybe he's trying to figure himself out. And in a way, they're not wrong. He is relearning who he is under this new mantle. But I think we as fat people also kind of take that on a little bit. As we get fatter, we're kind of rediscovering who we are. For many of us, especially those of us who are thin, you know, Kurt, I imagine for yourself, you know, you carried quite a specific twink aesthetic before you started gaining. There's probably a sense that as you get fatter, you start to realize people around you treat you a little bit differently. Or maybe there are certain situations that's like, oh, they don't want to do that with me anymore because of my weight. Or, oh, they're not inviting me, or they're treating me differently because of that.
Yeah, I mean, when I was a twink, of course, I could like walk into any sort of party, like a gay party, and guys would be interested in me, even though I'm like, they don't know anything really about me besides the way I look. And you could walk in any store and people, could just be like, oh, you should try this on. This will look great on you. And all, but people don't really do that to me anymore. Of course, if I walk into like a party that's for like chubs chasers and bears or something, that's different. But for a regular stereotypical gay party, people probably won't be as interested in me. And also getting bigger, my lifestyle really has changed a lot. Like I guess that's also being older too, because I don't really want to go out all the time. I don't really have the urge to go to clubs all the time. I go to big parties, like Belly Rub Weekend and the Grommr, and I was just at International Bear Convergence in Palm Springs. That was fun. Just like I go to those kind of parties, but I don't really go out regularly every night, like to a bar or to a club or anything. I kind of focus on being fat and eating a lot, and of course, just like when you do that, you don't want to do anything. And I look for people who are into that sort of lifestyle.
I think that's key, really. And again, we do see a bit of this in the film. He has to divorce himself from the world that he knew, step into this North Pole, elvish support, yada yada, to fulfill the mantle. But also, that's where he's going to be the most celebrated. That's where he's going to have the most fun to live his life and do his thing. It is the same thing with gainers and with fat people. There is a wonderful notion of merging spaces and presenting a world in which people of size can do what they want, live their life normally around straight-sized people, but in many situations, it is good to focus on where we are specifically chaste, and not chaste as in like CHASTE, like chaste or anything like that. Chaste as in CHASED. We are chased by people. We are wanted. We are desired. As you say, Kurt, once upon a time, you went to places and parties and with people where the twinkness is what people wanted. Now they want something different because you look different, and so therefore you go and associate in the spaces that substantiate that. And when you think about that journey for yourself, would you say you are happier now having stepped into that and fulfilled that larger fantasy?
Yes, 100%. I mean, even when I was skinny, I was always hungry, and now, I mean, I'm still always hungry, but I'm at least in the body that I want to be in, which also makes me more comfortable. And I don't know, it's like being fat is like you're eternally horny. And I walk into a room and I just feel, when with my belly walking in first before I do, and it just feels so good. And the only time that I get really jealous is when there's someone else who's fatter than me in the room.
Coming back to the film for a sec here, I want to talk about the iconic scene, because I feel like people would be upset if we didn't. He's in a doctor's office. He's jogging on a treadmill. It pans up some chubby calves and legs, and we see this beautiful belly hanging out of a t-shirt. I mean, is this... I think we can say without much extrapolation that this is a very iconic mental image for many people. But do you find that there are other like moments in the film that really emphasize his size that you come back to personally, Kurt? Or do you find like that's the kind of one that sticks out front and center?
No, I mean, that one's definitely the climax for me. There's really no other scene, because I think it's because that scene in particular is when he's, to me, the most daddy looking, as in like his hair is gray, but it's not white. He's big. I mean, when I was younger, he looked huge, but now when I look at it, he looks not that big, but the way the doctor's sort of talking to him, almost like, which is a way that I feel like doctors wouldn't talk to most people nowadays. The doctor's very positive about his weight gain. Like, it's like almost like it's not a big deal to him. The doctor also kind of reminds me of the doctor from Family Guy, where he's almost like, not really giving him any good advice or anything.
You mentioned that actually, because reflecting on that scene, like, first of all, the doctor is not a slim person. He's probably got a little bit of a paunch himself. But second of all, it's Scott who he's still processing the weight gain. He's like, yeah, but I gained 45 pounds in a week. And he's like, must be a hormonal imbalance of some description. I can't tell you. And he's like, your blood sugars levels are normal. Your heart rate's normal, yada, yada, yada. You're just carrying extra weight. And like, actually, yeah, that's probably one of the few examples we see a doctor actually say, like, the actual health things that I am here to determine about you are fine. Like, yes, you have extra weight, but at this stage, it's just extra weight. There is nothing of note. There is no medical malpractice. There is no chemical cancerous thing that is slowly destroying you. as opposed to what we typically hear from people nowadays. I mean, Tim, nurse, jump in with this.
I was gonna say, I hate to burst anyone's bubble, but if you gain 45 pounds in a week, that's really bad. It's very dangerous. Like, that's most likely not even fat, it's probably water. And if you're filling up with water at that rate, yeah, that's very, very bad.
Well, you heard it here.
Obviously it's magic that's making him put on weight that quickly. It's the Santa magic. And like for me, yeah, the treadmill scene is of course a great scene, but like I think honestly there's something about the morning where he wakes up and he goes to the bathroom and he looks in the mirror for the first time and he's like there's all this stubble that's grown on his face, his hair's starting to turn, and then he like looks down and he's like surprised by this pot belly that has come out of nowhere, like apparently must have grown overnight. And then, like we said, he gets on the scale and it's slowly creeping up. Like those are moments that I love. But I think genuinely my favorite part of this film is anytime that Bernard is on the screen, because I totally identify with Bernard. I would be the sarcastic, bitchy elf. So,
Oh, 100%. Also, the actor who played Bernard has gotten very fat in recent
yes, he
So if
has.
you all haven't Googled, oh, hang on, shit, what's his name?
David Krumholtz.
David Krumholtz. If y'all have not looked at David Krumholtz in a minute, well, his name ain't Krumholtz anymore because there's no crumbs left, all right? He licked up every last one from the plate because the man is plump. Very,
Also,
very
notice he's also eating in practically every scene. 'Cause every
Oh,
time,
that's right. Yeah.
every time he shows up at the house, he's eating the food that's in the house.
foreshadowing. Ah. So, as we come more towards the end of this episode, Kurt, I want to give you space here to talk about your journey because, of course, you've talked about how this is a film you saw when you were quite young and you identified with Charlie, and now you've got this body that is, of course, incredible and very, very recognizable. I mean, when you reflect on the journey you've been on up until this point, do you feel like there are other aspects that you've encountered that were maybe informed by other pieces of media you've seen growing up that we could explore?
So this movie is obviously probably at the top. The only thing that I guess kind of is annoying about movies like this and media like this is that the sort of instant weight gain that I always dream about, whereas my gaining is very slow. I've only gained probably 10 to 20, possibly 30 pounds a year since I started. So I started in 2010 and, I've gained about 250 pounds since then. So I started at 150. Now I'm 390, almost 400. So as far as other media, I mean, I can think of there was a Goosebumps episode called or I guess it's a book too, Say Cheese and Die Too, where the kid took a picture and he got fat, which when you look at that back again, the fat suit was so crazy looking. There was that episode in Sabrina the Teenage Witch where there was a Hansel and Gretel episode, and was her boyfriend's name was Harvey, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and where the witch was sprinkling this like special sprinkle on all his food, and he got fatter there too. Of course, heavyweights I think is like the most real because all the kids were actually fat. Yeah, so and when when Keenan said there was going to be heavyweights too during April Fool's last year, I was so excited, but then obviously it didn't happen because it's April Fool's. And I think also I loved watching, always the first few episodes of Biggest Loser whenever that would come out.
Well, it's interesting, right? When you think about the different pieces of media that inspire us and, the journeys that we go on and the kind of ways that it flavors our own gaining experience. I mean, to give you a chance to speak on this for yourself, Kurt, like from your own gaining journey, what has been the biggest joy and the biggest surprise from what you've come to experience in your fat existence?
Biggest joy is I guess I didn't expect I feel so good about myself all the time. And this is not like me saying like I'm the greatest person in the world. This is just me feeling good about myself. And the biggest challenge is definitely telling the people I love that I'm happy because it's so hardwired in people to not like being fat based on society and for whatever health things, and it's just so hard for my family and some friends to really understand that I'm really happy the way I am. And even though I tell them all the time, I can show them my doctor's, records, even though it's none of their business, really.
Yeah, like it's not appropriate for people to have proof to substantiate whether or not, you are something or are not something. I think you're absolutely right. There is this thing in the world where people see you transform. I've said this before, I've experienced this from my own family, where people will assume things about your mental health, your physical health, and at the end of the day, fuck off. Like, it's not for you. Even if you were having all sorts of medical issues, that's your situation to resolve. It's interesting that people feel they have some kind of right to have eyes on your health or on your lifestyle, as if they have an ownership of you or your lived experience, which is fucking weird.
I mean, I think that healthy gaining is hot in a way, just because, I go to the doctor regularly. I get checked up, but I think it's hot that I have a CPAP. I think it's hot that I have to take medication for being fat, as in like blood pressure and cholesterol.
I think there's a point to be made there about the reasons why we think it's inappropriate to enjoy something like unhealthy gaining, or the fact that we can find a pleasure in requiring mobility aids or supports in that kind of a regard. And I think a lot of that question has to come down to whether or not we think it's okay to have those things in the first place. Like, why is the only reason you're allowed to have assistance in some regard a requirement? Why can't there be joy? Why does it have to be a requirement? Because if that was the case, then the only logic is it's a punishment. You are only allowed to have a CPAP machine because you're a bad person, and therefore must use a CPAP machine. But why can't AIDS be a joyful thing? There are a lot of people in this world who require vision support. Do we like throw the glasses at them and say, "Here, you blind fuck, put these on, you idiot, with your stupid eyeballs that don't function properly"? Like, that language, that notion is ridiculous. So I feel like if we can find a joy and a pleasure in the experiences that we're having, and people find themselves challenged by that, they should ask themselves what that challenge is, because it probably is more reflective of an ableism that they have that they need to work through, and fat phobia, for good measure.
It goes back to like how when people said that being gay is a choice. We're hardwired in our brain, as in like as gainers, to we can't get away from the fact that being fat is hot. So to me, it's the same way. It's, I could choose not to be fat, but it would go against what I think is hot, or as what is like in my brain as what is hot.
Well, and not just what is hot, but what makes you happy.
Yeah,
That you're
exactly.
happy as a big person. And most of us, like, we really, if we had to lose weight because of some extreme impending medical condition, there are many of us that would say, okay, like, I get it. Like, I do want to live, longer. So I'm willing to do this. But there's so many of us that would be devastated by something like that, and would be so unhappy to have to, go in, to have to lose the weight after all the effort that we put in, after all the years that we've been trying to achieve something.
I mean, I think what we're ultimately coming around to here as we wrap up this episode is that, there is a power in the fat and in the size that we've accrued. There is a joy that we experience, and there is a reality where when you begin to lean into this authenticity, you feel a comfort in indulging in your kinks and in your particular process. Like you say, Kurt, you indulge in unhealthy gaining because that's your right to do so. And you are an intelligent enough person to say, well, if I want to do this and do this for a long time, I've got to manage that by having some expectations and some ground rules, like going and getting regular health checkups, just to make sure that we're not going too far in any particular direction that might result in things that we don't want to have happen. And that's the conversation. That's the beginning, middle, and end of it. Tim, I think a lot of what you're saying there is, if we had to lose weight, we would feel a devastation. And it's very, very true, because we work so hard to gain the weight that we do. And I think ultimately, what we can learn from the Santa Claus is there is joy that comes from fulfilling this destiny that comes on us, this destiny of becoming fat. And when you get to live in that, there is joy. And that's kind of the end of it. When you eschew the old life of, people who aren't pro-fat, people who are judgy, people who are whatever about it, you're not really losing out on anything. There is a lot of positivity yet to come for everyone who indulges, and I think that's what's being celebrated here.
It's his destiny to become Santa, and it's our destiny to become fat.
Precisely. Well, I think that's a great place to end things for this special episode. Kurt, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a real pleasure.
Thank you, guys. It's a real pleasure to be on the Santa Claus episode, because I know that's a very hot topic for everyone.
Now, where can our listeners find you online?
You can find me at fatboybey practically everywhere, I believe. Yeah, it's every platform. Instagram, Twitter, X, BlueSky, Grommr, TikTok, Tumblr also, of course.
Well, that's it for another week here on Thicc Radio. Please remember to like and subscribe, rate us 5 stars, and leave us a good review. Now, if you liked this episode, the podcast, or just us in general, please share it with your friends and encourage them to tune in. You can find me on Instagram and BlueSky at stannnum.
And you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok at thiccmouse. You can also look us up on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at Thicc Radio, or at our website at podpage.com/Thicc Radio. If you want to submit a voice note or become a financial supporter of the show, you can find the links in the show notes. And you can always write to us at thiccradio@gmail.com. So until next time, bye, Fats.
Bye, Fats.
Bye, Fats.
Let's talk about it.
Thicc Radio is a Patreon and Enter app podcast produced by Stan and Thicky Mouse.
Mixed and mastered by stannnum.
Our artwork is provided by Lokitu.
Our theme song is provided by Fatboybey.